Hello, my name's Ed Gillespie. I'm very happy to be speaking to you today on Startup Day 2021. And I'm going to be talking to you about the regenerative business revolution, why entrepreneurs are wanted. I'm a director of Greenpeace UK, and I've been involved in at least a dozen different environmental and ethical startup businesses of various shape and form as a director, mentor, and investor. So hopefully I can put my money where my mouth is. So it can feel right now, in the week we're recording this of COP26, that we're in the apocalypse, the end of the world. But actually, I like to go back to the etymology of apocalypse, which is about the drawing back of the veil, the revealing of the way things actually work, because that's probably more pertinent right now, because we're starting to see the dodgy pipework that sits underneath our economy. And climate change is obviously front of everyone's minds at the moment, but just to remind us of the stark reality, our current policies are still delivering a climate change world of somewhere between 2 and 3 degrees, whereas if we want to be consistent with the Paris Agreement, we're going to be at 1.5 degrees. You can see how steeply that emission curve, the green curve, has to come down if we are to achieve that. But also, we can't think about this as just climate or just carbon. Essentially, we're facing a series of waves. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic wave. We're hopefully coming into the tail end of that. The economic recession wave is hitting. Climate is coming up rapidly behind, but equally biodiversity collapse. The challenge of ecological sustainability is right behind. And it's not just me saying this with my Greenpeace hat on. The World Economic Forum's long-term risk outlook has over half of its key long-term risks as biologically or ecologically or environmentally related. So my job as a futurist working in ethical and startup businesses is not to predict or analyze the future, but is to stretch the imagination of the possible, of what we could or really should be doing. And in that sense, the most fundamental lesson we can learn is hearing the real questions that the future is asking of us. My favorite Buddhist quote is that the wise learn from the past, but the brave, the courageous, learn from the future. And entrepreneurs are all about learning from the future. Because if we go right back to the Latin for company, companio, it means who you break bread with. The reason we get into business is to do things that we can't do individually and to hopefully serve the world in some way. And if you look back historically at the kind of philanthro capitalists of the past, the early days of Unilever and the creation of places like Port Sunlight, where their staff were educated, housed, and very well looked after. It's this sort of generosity of business which has been lost in recent decades in the primacy of shareholder value. And if we want to explore that brief history of responsible business, there's 4 key stages: the environmental efficiency, the social responsibility, the emergence of social business models, but ultimately this game is about changing the rules. Now, efficiency was where we started to cut all our environmental impacts, our carbon footprints, energy efficiency, removing to renewable energy, waste management, tentative steps towards an emergence of a circular economy. But those were all principally also money-saving ideas. So efficiency will only take us so far. Corporate social responsibility then emerged, where it was businesses trying to demonstrate that they were also socially responsible as well as economically successful. And that debate has been an emergent debate. It's been going on for many years, but has ultimately led into a sort of cul-de-sac of what we might call faux-lanthropy. Businesses trying to be seen to be looking good without necessarily changing the core elements of their business models. Following that, we had sort of creating shared value, where businesses were trying to orientate themselves around the fact that they might actually also be creating value for the people within their supply chain, the workers who created their products, and also wider society. And again, this has sort of bumped up against the limits of what might be practical. Because as Yvon Chouinard, the founder of the outdoor clothing firm Patagonia, said, there is no such thing as a sustainable company in an unsustainable world. What we are changing here is a system. It has to be fundamentally about systemic change. And that's going to require us to think differently about prosperity, what prosperity means in the round, not just about economic success, but how to flourish and thrive with 9 billion people on one planet by 2050. And if we look back at the oldest companies in the world, this is Congo Gumi. a Japanese company which was founded in AD 578. So a 1500-year-old company nearly, clearly with its eyes on the long term. It does build Buddhist temples, so admittedly perhaps not a sector going massively out of fashion. But perhaps we could draw our horizons back slightly more modestly than 1500 years and start to think about at least 7th generation thinking, where not in the Native American sense, which is the impact that might happen 7 generations hence, but to think of ourselves as entrepreneurs as a pivotal generation within that span of 7, between our great-grandparents and our great-grandchildren. A very different world has emerged since our great-grandparents were our age, and a very different world will have to emerge by the time our great-grandchildren are. So this reflects the wide time span of influence that our lives can touch right now. And as one of my favorite writers, Tyson Yunkaporta, Australian Aboriginal writer, says, we're at the start of a 1,000-year undertaking, because that is how long it's going to take for those old growth forests to return. And that should give us a sense of where we have to be headed. And of course, the United Nations and a great consortium and coalition of businesses, government and third sector organizations have already defined the global goals for sustainable development over the next 10 to 15 years. And these cover the transformation that we're trying to achieve. And indeed, I've run specific business accelerators around trying to address these particular goals. But we also have to reframe our position on what economic success, growth and productivity looks like. Kate Raworth's Donut Economics is fantastic in this sense, which identifies the need for establishing a strong social foundation, equity of access to all of those things in life that really matter, from health, education to good shelter, etc. And then to do that within an ecological ceiling. That safe and just space for humanity exists between that social foundation and that ecological ceiling. Because right now we're still guilty of what we might call willful blindness, which is a legal principle that you're responsible if you could have known, and indeed should have known, something which instead you strove or chose not to see. And we can see this willful blindness around us all over the place right now, as people are wrangling with the business models of large organizations which are not congruent with a climate safe world, or are not arranging their purpose and their movement going forward to deliver net zero. And as Margaret Heffernan, my colleague at the Forward Institute, who wrote the book on willful blindness, says, the truth won't set us free until we develop the skills, the habit, the talent, but perhaps most importantly, the moral courage to use it. And I've seen this evolve over the 20 years or so of my career, where when I was a consultant, clients used to come to me and say, what should our sustainability strategy be in the context of our business? So that was very much an add-on in terms of trying to address sustainability within the existing business model. Now our challenge is, what should our business strategy be in the context of the drive towards sustainability? It's a very important reversal of the previous position. And that begins obviously with purpose. That's great if you're an entrepreneur, because you can start off with your business having a deep rooted sense of purpose. And as the song goes in the musical Avenue Q, it's that little flame that lights a fire under your ass. Because ultimately, without purpose that's bigger than yourself, you are more likely to serve only yourself. So we have to have this systemic perspective on the changes that we're going to have to deliver together. And the famous example of this is obviously the Kodak moment, where Kodak as a business made 2 fundamental mistakes. One, they didn't live their purpose, which was about securing and treasuring those wonderful sentimental moments of holidays and family parties on celluloid film. But they also didn't disrupt themselves. They didn't disrupt their own business model. Because if Kodak had, they would have rolled out the digital camera, which they had on the shelf, but they thought that was in direct competition with their own business model. And equally, if they had disrupted themselves, they would ultimately have delivered Instagram, which they obviously also failed to do. So living your purpose and disrupting your own business model are absolutely fundamental to what it means to be a regenerative entrepreneur. And my favorite example of this is Tyson Foods, the US's biggest meat packaging and distributor, who heavily invested in Beyond Meat, the plant-based burger business, precisely because, as the CEO, Tom Hayes, said, I don't want to have a Kodak moment. And even Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which has about $6 trillion invested in businesses around the world, biggest individual stakeholder on the planet, said without a sense of purpose, no company, either public or private, can achieve its full potential. And purpose matters because it is also how we bring our people along with us. As the Gallup State of the Global Workplace report identified in 2020, that 80% of employees are not engaged or actually actively disengaged at work. It's what my colleague Mark Stevenson describes as bribery, not reward, because disengagement is a symptom of the direction in which business is going. It is not a root cause of employee dissatisfaction. And added to that, we have this evolution of trust, which is going on, where we've gone from local individual trust, handshakes, eye contact, peer-to-peer type of trust in real life, through this phase of institutional trust, whereby we had bodies and organizations which helped to intermediate that sense of trust. And increasingly in the modern world, we're in this distributed trust, which is where it's gone back to peer-to-peer, but it's much more virtual. Think TripAdvisor and Trustpilot, and the fact that we would trust other people's perspectives rather than organizational, institutional ones. And this is crucial for business because that's moved from trust being opaque, closed, quite centralized, licensed and top down, to trust now being much more transparent, inclusive, decentralized, accountable and bottom up. And this is why the previous efforts around corporate social responsibility are no longer enough. We can see that the emperor wears no clothes, and we need to start cutting him or her a new suit. Now, there are many movements around this. You've probably come across the Benefit Corporation movement, the B Corp movement that's come out of the United States, where companies rewrite their articles of association to place social and environmental value on a par with shareholder value to enable them to make more informed, systemic, and hopefully broader decisions. And that seems to be paying off in terms of economic success as well. As has been noted, that B Corps tend to grow much, much faster than average UK GDP. And perhaps that's because they are doing something differently with a bigger than self purpose. We shouldn't also discount some of the older models, such as cooperatives, which have existed for now over 150 years. And as the Rochdale pioneers who drew up those initial principles of cooperatism noted, like, this ideal is as old as human society. It's the idea of conflict and competition as a principle of economic progress that is new. And we need to capture that because the future is going to be collaborative. And in this sense, whilst everyone's talking about sustainability, we have to see sustainability as merely a stepping stone on the pathway to a regenerative entrepreneurial future. From our current degenerative economy, we need to get through this sticking plaster of sustainability and into a regenerative world. Because right now we're still stuck in damage limitation. Like, as I say, this incremental efficiencies, these taking small steps, which are reducing the impact on the world. But remember, we're driving ourselves over the cliff at an ever faster pace. So unless we can flip into the right-hand side of this diagram and start to develop organizations and institutions and businesses which are genuinely restorative and regenerative, we're going to have a problem. Because regenerative business is the only future. Businesses have to put back more than they take to build back the ecological capital and the ecosystem services which keep the whole global show genuinely on the road, not just try to minimize harm. And the market is going to play a crucial role in this because we are going to have to shape and steer that market together. As Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute put it, the market makes a good servant, a bad master, but a terrifying God. And left to the market, we are not going to solve our sustainability challenges. And we also have to be honest with ourselves because there is a huge honesty gap right now in terms of the supposed sunlit uplands that sit on the other side of the dark mountain we have to climb. This is going to involve change, and it's probably, as Adam Kay, the junior doctor, wrote in his book, it's probably going to hurt. And so we need to be cognizant too of the fact that it's not going to be a smooth or indeed painless transition. And that's a shakedown because, as Seth Godin, the US marketeer guru, says, increasingly there are only two kinds of companies, the brave and the dead. The brave companies that can see the sunlit uplands of that solar punk style future, where we can get to a position where we are living a clean, green, and genuinely sustainable quality of life. And those which are putting the brakes on change, the vested interests conducting rearguard actions, which are basically avoiding the inevitable and are holding us back from the transformation required. And the sci-fi writer William Gibson often talks about all of the wonderful examples of the small businesses that I'm involved in and that many other entrepreneurs are trying to build in order to tackle these challenges, and saying the future's out there, it's just not evenly distributed yet. We pretty much have every technology we need. We have the finance in order to invest in them. The barrier, unfortunately, is our mindsets to make that happen, that we don't actually believe it's possible. Someone also paraphrased this quote to say, if you look at the doom and gloom that's out there at the moment, the collapse is also out there. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So we are very much on a knife edge type of situation. So my challenge to you as entrepreneurs thinking about sustainability and the transition towards regenerative business is that only the impossible is interesting. We have to get excited about doing things we have never done before. We are not going to get into this future by using the lessons from the past. We have to listen to the hard questions the future is asking us and try and be commercially savvy in response to that. Because any attempt to build back to normal, or even to a certain extent build back slightly better, ain't going to be enough. It's a bit like Darth Vader describing the construction of a new Death Star as an amazing job creation opportunity. Indeed, it may be Darth, but unfortunately, it destroys planets. So I'd leave you to reflect as you try and come up with your own regenerative business ideas with a new business you're developing or an existing business you are trying to pivot, with the Japanese concept of ikigai, which literally means a reason for being. And that is to find doing what you love, combining it with what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And it's that amalgamation of passion, mission, profession, and vocation which develops the ultimate satisfaction in terms of a reason for being. So when you look at all of the huge challenges that are laid out in front of us, it can feel intimidating, it can feel debilitating, it can feel paralyzing. I always return to the environmental and climate psychologist, Caroline Hickman from the University of Exeter, who actually advises us to adapt a scuba diving technique, because when you're diving underwater and things go wrong, it's an extremely hazardous position. But there are 5 things that you do when that happens, and that's stop, you breathe to gather yourself, you think, you connect with your buddy, with your partner underwater, and then you act. And I think this is fantastic guidance for any entrepreneur as they are about to step forward into the brave new world that's emerging. So stop, breathe, understand the context in which we're at, develop those ideas, connect and collaborate, and then take the action that we all so desperately need. So go out there and make it happen. Thank you very much.